Hello and welcome to Behind the Scenes Breakdown. My name is Liam Croft and I am the Digital Ministry Coordinator here at St. Mark's Anglican Church. This series will be taking a look at how we swiftly moved our services online at the start of the COVID-19 pandemic and the changes we've made since to improve them. In this first episode, we're going to be taking a look at the early days of the pandemic and how we worked to improve and incorporate new things into our services. So, let's get started. I've been a parishioner at St. Mark's for over a decade, and over the years I have developed a little bit of a hobby for video editing and video production. Some parishioners may remember when we made a series of music videos, first to the tune of Happy and later to the tune of Praise You, which showcased some of the ministries going around St. Mark's and the wonderful community that is present. At the start of the pandemic, however, I was very far away in London, Ontario, going to school. So I wasn't necessarily immediately close by when it was announced that we'd have to close our doors and then move everything online. Nevertheless, I never lost touch, and I was able to get in contact with Archdeacon Peter. We'd actually been speaking a little bit prior to the pandemic, and a few emails later, we were in the church prepping for our first live stream, which was for the Lent 4 service.
Hello, St. Mark's. It's Friday afternoon, March the 20th, and I am standing in front of the altar of our beloved church. I'm here with Liam Croft, who is helping out with the technology of, we hope, to be live streaming this service on Sunday, a service of the Word, and you were invited to tune in at 9:30 that morning on the 22nd of March.
The Lent 4 service is a little bit unique because it is the first service that we ever did during the pandemic and one of the only online services St. Mark's had ever had up until that point. And beyond that, it is the only service that we recorded at the time live. We live streamed it to Facebook, and we live streamed it to Facebook using an old phone that could stay at the church and be disinfected in case one of us got sick. It was really quite an interesting time because none of us really knew what this pandemic would be at the time. So we were really trying to plan for everything. And so we set up very quickly our YouTube channel, which had never existed before, and we finally claimed our Facebook page, which previously had this single photo of this lovely pug as the profile photo. And so we had to work very quickly to try to build out our online presence so that we would be able to live stream effectively and efficiently. Because we thought that was kind of the only way we could do it back then. The audio in this video is exclusively from the phone, so it's a little bit tinny, and the lovely resolution and coloring is all partially due to that older phone, but it's also largely because we were live streaming, and this file was taken straight from the live stream, so it's a very compressed file. You can see in some of these images that we were really trying to do things relatively makeshift. This stand is actually something we still use to this day. We sometimes take a little bit of an approach of, if it's not broken, don't try and fix it. But this is what we use. Peter had this lovely tripod, and I happened to have a little mini tripod which had a camera mount on it for a smartphone, and then we just used some boxes and some chairs and set it up in the center of the church, in the center aisle, and away we went. We ran a single test live stream prior, and we sent out a couple of announcements. But that was really the beginning of the Lent 4 service. Now, the Lent 5 service is the first service where we really tried to make some significant improvements to how we were distributing our services and also how we were producing them. That Sunday, Lent 5 in 2020, Bishop Susan Bell was visiting St. Mark's in person and was going to be streaming on Sundays, which meant that we couldn't use the sanctuary at 9:30 as we planned to stream our services. And so that necessitated a pre-recorded segment, a pre-recorded service. I think we recorded on a Wednesday. And so that is why we were able to have multiple camera angles and kind of edit it together. And we used iMovie on an iPad, actually, not unlike this one here, to develop all of our services all the way up until almost September, which is for anyone that works in videography, quite the interesting feat, but it's what we were comfortable with, and we were producing so much content so rapidly that it was kind of another situation of status quo. Now, one of the best parts of being able to have the pre-recorded video was, as you saw at the beginning of the service, we were able to have a bit of a montage of titles and text, essentially announcements, to the backdrop of that lovely stained glass from around the church. And part of this was also we finally got to work with Greg. This was actually my first time meeting Greg Dickinson, our music ministry coordinator here at St. Mark's. And I was able to work with him, and we inserted this pre-recorded version, this piano version of Amazing Grace, and we continued with our music ministry. To this day, we record weekly. So these were some of the first big significant changes. Another change is we changed how we were recording audio. Back initially in our first service, a week ago, before this one was recorded, we were recording just using the microphone on a phone, just the back microphone. And, in a pinch that can work, but it obviously isn't optimal. And this was back when we were still experimenting and learning. So what we ended up doing is we used a series of different over-ear headphones placed strategically around the church, and essentially it was treated like they were on a call, as if you were talking to someone. And so those Bluetooth headphones were used with a third-party movie recording app. I think it's called Movie Pro, installed on a variety of different devices, located around the church, so that we could get the center altar view that you see here, and also the lectern. And we just used those headphones to try to capture the audio as best we could. So those were the major components of the Lent 5 service, and it was really an important service for us because it was such a step forward in terms of how we were recording these services. Now, as we moved farther into the season of Lent and we made it to Palm Sunday, we continued to try to innovate with what we were doing now that we were pre-recording. And pre-recording was ultimately decided to be our fate. Obviously, we loved the live streaming component at the start and being able to interact with people in real time. But the unfortunate thing that happened during the bishop's visit was in a lovely centuries-old building like St. Mark's, our wireless internet connection wasn't the world's strongest. And so we ran into problems when Bishop Susan Bell was recording with us. We ran into a situation where the stream was continually dropping out, and obviously that's a very frustrating experience, not only for anyone involved in the service, but anyone trying to watch the service. So, nevertheless, we decided to press on with the recording on Wednesdays, and that allowed us to continue to add music in additionally with separate recordings, and allowed us to continue to have multiple camera angles, because at the time we didn't really know how to do multiple camera angles, at least I didn't, while live streaming. And that's a technology that we're now able to do. But back in early 2020, at the start of this pandemic, we were definitely being a little bit more experimental. One thing I also want to note is at the time we weren't really offering spiritual communion or going to traditional with these services. They were a little bit of a hybrid of our typical 8:30 and 10 o'clock services, but without the Eucharist, so it was just a service of the Word. And I think Archdeacon Peter, Canon Lynn, and Deacon Richard all did a good job of adapting the service to the needs of viewers back in early 2020. But I'd also like to say that they, all of them, did a wonderful job adapting to speaking in front of an empty church apart from me and sometimes my mom, Tracy. It was a very strange experience. One of the things I would try to do, especially during sermons and whenever lectern was being used, is I tried to stand behind whichever camera they were supposed to be looking into. So at least it felt like they were preaching or speaking to someone within the building. And they all did an awesome job, and I think you can tell the difference and their improvement watching newer services relative to older ones. And working with them has been a real blessing. All of them, not only Peter, Richard, and Lynn, but also everyone from Carol to our new office administrator, Mariska, of course, Greg and Nancy, who have come in almost every single week to record music. There are so many thank yous out there. Jim, Anne, Trish, there's so many that I would never hit them all. But they've all done a marvelous job in adapting, not only still to this day, but also back all the way back here on Palm Sunday more than a year ago. Now, in addition to services, one of the things that we had to deal with was, of course, our Lions Children's Ministry program was also put on hold when the church was closed to the public. And so one of the things that my mom and I, Tracy, who is the children's ministry coordinator here at St. Mark's, one of the things we worked on together was trying to build up a series of videos that would be appropriate for each week for the children in the Lion's Den, trying to target a wide variety of age groups. And so these were uploaded all to YouTube over a number of weeks. In fact, I think we did it for about 3 months back in early 2020. And so we had craft videos like this one, and we also had a number of different Lego videos, which targeted different Bible stories that could be recreated with Lego. And those are some of the things that we're exploring in new series now with the Lion's Den series, which is essentially a spiritual successor to these series of Lions videos. You can see this interesting overhead camera shot here for this craft. And there is also the work with time lapses and all sorts of different things that we've worked to take from these early projects and early videos and move them into new series and new videos and new services. So it was quite an interesting experience. This overhead shot was actually shot in our dining room. We were able to do the overhead by simply having a book on top of our chandelier, if you want to call it a chandelier, and then just setting a phone precariously over the edge pointing down, and then they were just edited together into these videos. And again, back in early 2020, like here, where we're just using the audio from the phones that we were recording with, and still editing, just using iMovie on an iPad. So that is how all of those Lion's Den videos in the early days and months were recorded. Now, as we moved past Palm Sunday and in towards the end of Lent with Good Friday here and towards Easter, I remember thinking back at the beginning of the pandemic, well, this may last, a month. There is debate on whether or not we would even have to pre-record at the time, how long things would be changed for. And in fact, obviously, they went on a little bit longer than we expected, for some of us anyway. But I'm thankful that at least we have been able to see each other and continue to share our ministry in some ways, as biased as I may be. And this was one of the services that took a lot of work from the Altar Guild, who had to work under the conditions of the lockdown, to strip the church of all of its things and bring in the cross. And it's also one of the situations where it allowed for a little bit of creativity on my side of things, where because we were still pre-recording, I could add a bit of a candle opening on the Christ candle, which would later be extinguished, and kind of add some of those more artistic flavors, which is one of the things that is so nice about this position, and being able to add my own little touch to certain services. And that's something I'll speak more about as we move farther into our online situation over the next number of episodes of this series. But nevertheless, one of the things you may be wondering, or may have wondered all the way back then, is Liam, this service still has an opening segment that's just silent with a whole bunch of announcements. What's going on? That's obviously the interesting camera work is nice, but why can't we just start with the service right away? And obviously we could, but the reason I chose to do it this way was simply because when you're live streaming something, or in fact premiering like we are these videos, which is essentially a live stream but with a completely finished video already uploaded to either Facebook or YouTube, it takes people a moment to click on and start watching. And I like to try to avoid situations where people join, partway through. Obviously, it still happens, but that's part of the reason those opening sections are so long, especially early on here before we had a particularly heavy presence of preludes and music in general from Greg, Nancy, and the rest of the choir. Now, one of the interesting things with this opening shot of the Easter service that you can see behind me is we had to move all of the camera gear, the makeshift tripod with the chairs. And fun fact for the lectern view, there is a much more makeshift setup, which involved quite a number of prayer cushions and a separate tripod. And we also were using work lights at this time before we bought later on a series of softbox lights, which are much more pleasant to look into. I have one on me now. We were using essentially construction worksite lights, which were very bright and definitely helped when we were using these older phones back at the beginning of the pandemic. But they definitely were not pleasant to look into. So this is another example of one of those things where we were able to improve it a little bit with time. This service also is one of the first ones where you can really see Greg and Nancy present in the service, edited in afterwards. Initially, we just kind of had a couple of preludes here and there, with some background footage overlaid over top. But in this service later on, you can see Greg and Nancy in the back there singing hymns. So this is the Easter Sunday service from 2020, and it was kind of by this point that we realized that this was probably going to stick around for a while. The pandemic was definitely in a different state than it is today as I'm recording this video, and we were aware that things were going to be probably like this for a number of months at least. So we started to take action to try to improve the long-term success of these services, be it with the purchase of technology and filming gear like softbox lights, but also trying to set up a bit more of a routine where I was comfortable editing and uploading and recording a series of different videos in quick succession, especially now that once this service was uploaded, my exams were over, because while school indeed did close, my exams continued. So it was nice once this service got out and we began moving into the season of Easter. Things stabilized a little bit, and we felt a little bit more comfortable kind of branching out and trying to help others from other parishes. And that's something I'll cover a little bit in the episode for next week. I'd like to thank you all for watching this episode of Behind the Scenes Breakdown. It's a little bit different, and I hope I haven't droned on too much, but it's definitely a series intended more for those interested in how we went about producing our online services and our online content, and how we continue to do that over the last number of months and indeed year, and how we look to continue doing that into the future. If you have any questions or comments, you can send an email to online@stmark.ca. If you like this kind of content and you would like to support us, please consider hitting the subscribe button here on YouTube, and feel free to leave a comment and a like below. Thank you very much. See you next week.